consulting and coaching, a company aiming to facilitate change and achieving goals, as her company's website says. She was formerly with the New York State Department of Education, where she held numerous positions. She has earned a PhD in sociology, as well as having done casework in New York City. So we believe she is well versed in relating the details of life to big ideas. Her background is well suited to giving us a vivid look into the personal life during the cataclysm called World War II, which she will be discussing and reading from her book, A Real Whole Lot, a World War II soldier's love letters to his wife. Over to you, Dr. Kane.
Okay, Roger, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint presentation to go along with our my talk today. And as you can see, we'll start out with my little flyer here that you also graciously put together for me. And I'm going to start first with just sort of saying a little bit about the letters. And most of the letters that were found were V-mail. And what you see here now is one of the V-mail letters, one from my mother and one from my father. And basically what these V-mail letters were basically Xeroxes, and the War Department, or as my father referred uh, to the War Department as Uncle Sam, and of course that's a common phraseology, a reference for the federal government to call him Uncle Sam. And of course, that phrase has a history in the Capital District, having started out in Troy, New York. So these are the letters. And as I said, most of the letters are V-mail letters. And my first contact with these letters was when I was a little girl playing in a closet. And my mother had saved these letters in two big brown paper bags. And my parents told me, oh, these are letters from your father when he was in the service. Well, of course, as a little girl, I couldn't read them. So, what did I know about these letters? So after my mother died, we went through my parents' papers, my siblings and I have a brother and a sister, and we found about 200 of these letters. And I want to tell you that my parents wrote to each other every day. Now, on this particular letter that's on the screen, you'll see that this letter was written in June of 1944. And it says, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, it says part one only. So there have been times, and because I don't have all the letters that were written, you'll see that this was part four, or this is part two, or sometimes my father in particular didn't even number the letters. He just kept writing. And so there may be a couple of letters with the same date on them, but he didn't describe them as part one, two, three, four, five. So I want to first talk to you about I'm going to be interspersing in my talk today some of the quotes from the book. And one of my favorites is one that my mother wrote. My mother went to Morgan State University. Both my parents did, but my mother was first a teacher and went to a teacher's college. So she got a 3-year teaching degree. And then she went to Morgan and got her bachelor's. And when she was at Morgan, she took a course that she needed to take, and she was required to keep a diary. And we found this diary also. So we have one semester of her writing in her diary. It was a journalism assignment. And she does say in one of the excerpts, which I didn't include in the book because it was just information, but it was an exercise in recording observations. And one of our observations was observing this man getting on the bus and what her, what she could write about this man and getting on the bus. But anyway, this particular entry, she says, "Dear Diary, no letters came today. It's odd how letters can mean so much to a person, especially in times like these. A friendly letter, just some paper with some writing on it. A message, most of the time insignificant and unimportant in content to all but the receiver. Yet many persons are sad because they did not get one, or many a little brightened because did get one. I wish I had gotten one today." And then I want to read one of the things that my father wrote um, in terms of letters. And both of these excerpts that I chosen, I think, illustrate what these letters meant to my parents. Not so much even what they said, but that they got to be connected to each other. Um, so my my father writes, "Darling Jackie, when it rains, sometimes it pours, doesn't it? Today I got three letters, two in the morning, one in the evening. I'm going to answer them all tonight and even tell you about myself. Darling, may I say, first and foremost, I do think a great deal of you. More than that, I'm crazy about you, Jackie, darling. Doesn't this pen write a little too thin? Does it make it hard for you to read the writing? If it does, let me know and I will make proper changes. Here I go, my love. Before I say a word, I don't really know how to say how much getting your letters mean, darling. Honest, darling. For all that I can say, sweetheart, there's no way I could really tell you how much I appreciate your having your mail pile up on me in the manner in which it did. Just wait until I take you into my arms. Then you will know, and then some. Honest, you wait." There was another time when my father talked about the letters where he says, "The other day I was going through my things in sort of a lightning of all kinds of things that I had to carry. One of the things that went were over 500 of your letters. I wanted to reread them, but I knew if I did, I wouldn't get rid of any of them. Somehow, I got around to burning them. That really hurt me, though, because you have written me many very beautiful letters." Now, my parents got married in 1941, just after my father graduated from college. One of the things we discovered in going through my parents' papers is the program from my father's graduation. And they got, he graduated on June 9th and they got married on June 11th. And so this is the program where it shows that my father, these things are going too fast, that my father got a Bachelor of Arts in English. And one of the things that's kind of funny in a way about this is when I discovered this program, we knew, both of my siblings and I knew that both my parents went to college, but none of us knew what my father majored in. My sister thought my father had majored in political science, and my brother thought my father had majored in business. And I don't think I had any opinion one way or the other about what he majored in. And so, anyway, this told us that he majored in English, and he also he graduated with honor, and he also got a prize. Right here, number 7, you'll see that he got the David Houston Memorial, which is which was a prize for $10 um, for excellence in English. So I think this sort of sets the ground because this shows, it gives you some indication how much my father well, not so much how much he liked to write, but that he loved the language. So here's a picture of my father when his graduation picture from Morgan. And this is a picture of my mother. We're not quite sure how old she was when this picture was taken, other than she was a young adult. One of the problems, in a sense, that we have is that my father is one of these people that if you say camera, he would say where, and he would pose and smile. So, needless to say, there are lots of pictures of my father, but very few pictures of my mother, because my mother's approach was, no, I'm not getting in that picture. So we don't have very many pictures of my mother. This is a picture of my father when he was drafted. My parents, as I said, they got married in June, and my father got drafted in October. Um, he was drafted. He rose to the rank, I guess you would call, of staff sergeant. I don't understand, the rankings and stuff, but from what I gather, that's kind of a big deal. So he went to Mississippi. One of the places that they lived for, where my father was stationed, was in Mississippi, because he went to this Columbus Army Flying School. And, the let me back up just a little bit. In that, my parents grew up in Baltimore. They were high school sweethearts. Their favorite place to hang out was in the library, and that's both of them were the oldest in their family. My father was the oldest of 12, my mother the oldest of 4. They were also the first in their families to go to high school, and certainly the first in their families to go to college. So um, my father was drafted. um, my mother was working as a teacher, and she stayed in Baltimore. Here's a picture of them in Mississippi. This was during the summer when my father was stationed in Mississippi. And I have sort of a funny story. There's in this, in this time, of course, Black folks did not stay hotels, motels, that kind of thing. There was the movie The Green Book that talked about accommodations. So when my mother went to visit my father, she stayed with this family in Mississippi. And they had a daughter who was probably at that time like 12 years old. And a couple of years ago, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta. I was at a convention in Miami. And at the time, they were recognizing members of the sorority who had been members for over 50 years. So it was between events, and I was sitting with next to one of these women who was going to be recognized, and we started talking. Well, lo and behold, she was the little girl that my parents had lived with in Mississippi. And it's like you just never know. There's actually a picture of her in the book. I didn't put the picture here, but you just never know about these connections. My father, after he was stationed in Mississippi, he decided that he wanted to apply for officers candidate school. And I thought that the Army, said, oh, here we have a college graduate, let's make this person an officer. But that was not, the way things worked. I saw somewhere that in World War II, there were over 1 million Black soldiers. And of course, at the time, so Black folks were called Negroes, and that there were 6,000 officers. So I'm not sure, again, I have to delve deeper into military history, but it's suggesting that maybe that wasn't that many officers for that many men who were in service at that time, and that the Black troops were often commanded by white officers, of course, at the upper levels, because they just didn't have um, Black officers who were at that level. I mean, it was Benjamin O. Davis was the first general appointed, and that was like in the early 40s. So, you know, they just did not have the line of officers to promote to be able to command the troops. So this is a picture of my father when he was at Officers Candidate School in North Dakota. So there were 4 Black soldiers who completed Officers Candidate School. And I have discovered, because I've been trying to um, monitor history, current events, that many soldiers who completed Officers Candidate School were not commissioned. So my father was commissioned as a second lieutenant. Um, this is a picture of him in Marseille. This was his last place that he was stationed. He was stationed in Virginia, in Mississippi, North Dakota, um, Algiers, and Marseille. Marseille was his last location before he came home. And um, he's walking now, according to what he wrote on the back. The guy that's with him is a lawyer. My father was attached to the court martial. And I think he was some kind of advocate. And he said that this lawyer told my father that he should go to law school, which my father did not do. The other thing that I guess may have made him seem like a good candidate for law school is that when my father was in high school and college, he participated in oratory contests. And he knew all kinds of Victorian poems that he would quote from time to time to my siblings and I. So I want to read a couple of more of the letters. Um, I want to share with you too what I found. This is from a resume that I found of my father's that was written in 1948. And this is back in the day when folks would put, you know, that they were married, how many children they had, where they, you know, all of that personal stuff that, you know, they don't put on anymore. And because he said he had a daughter that was 2 years old, I said, okay, that's 1948. So he said on his resume that he entered the service as a private, that he was discharged as a captain, and prior to going to officer candidate school, he was a staff sergeant serving as a truck master and acting first sergeant. Now, you probably know, or some of you may know, that primarily Negro soldiers were in the quartermaster. In other words, you know, doing shipping and that kind of thing. That it wasn't until near the end of the war that Black soldiers got to be part of the fighting army. You know, it was sort of like, you know, we need some people and we have spent a little money training these guys, so maybe we ought to use them. So, you know, so anyway, my father was in the quartermaster. He received training in the duties of an adjutant for various echelons of the Army's vast administration at the Army Administration, OCS. He gained practice in organization, distribution, and consumption of supplies. Now, one of the things my siblings and I say, and my sister and I in particular, my brother didn't learn this skill, but my father knew how to pack things. If you wanted to get something to fit in, you know, a bunch of stuff to get in the trunk or to get into a closet, give it to my father and he would get it in there and it would be well packed. My sister and I have picked up that skill. He served as a junior officer overseas from May of 43 to November of 45. He supervised the stevedore battalion in unloading and loading 18 ships simultaneously. Proper storage, managing, making reshipments, redistribution of cargo, and supervised at one time the duties of 9 officers, 600 soldiers, 1,000 civilians, and 1,000 prisoners of war. He served as a mess, supply, and executive officer and company commander, as well as a stevedore officer, trial judge advocate, and junior member of the General Courts Martial. Through 3 years as a commissioned officer, never received an efficiency rating of less than excellent. And at that time, he was in the Army Reserves, which he stayed in until he retired as a lieutenant colonel. And when I read this, I said, oh my God, I'm impressed with this man. Because as we know, folks who served in World War II very rarely talked about their experience. So it was like, oh my God, my father did all this. So this is part of what has grown out of, for me, this experience of writing, publishing these letters, and then finding out more about my father in particular, but also, finding out more about my parents in general. So I want to again read some excerpts from the book, from the letters. This one again is an excerpt from the diary from my mother. Diary dear, received 2 snapshots of Phil today. He looks wonderful, I thought. Here I am worrying myself to death about him. Nerves worn to a frazzle, and he's over there looking disgustingly healthy. We have been married for 3 Christmases already, and not one of them have we spent together. The first year he was in Georgia, the second year in North Dakota, and the last one in Africa. I hope this year he won't still be in France, but will be here instead. I wouldn't ask for anything else. Now, I will say it was another year before he came home. So that was written in 1944. He didn't come back to the States until November of 45. Now, this is from my father. My darling love, dearest, here I go. Today's our 3rd anniversary. Next year, I hope we will be together. I've thought of you a lot. This morning, as I slept, I just called out your name, Jackie, darling. I love you so much. I want you with all of me. Honest, I do. I wonder if you heard me call you, dearest, through the miles that separate us. Something, dear, I'm sure I heard you. My sweet, all of me, Jackie. I want you madly. I can't help it, dear. And I won't try to help it because I always want to be completely yours. Truly, darling, this is the truth. So help me. Forever, I'm yours. Here's another one from my father. I hope it will help keep me busy enough not to be wanting you too much. Do you think it is possible? Oh, I'm sorry. This is from my mother. My mother was in school at this time, and she was talking about. She was in class, and she was writing this letter. I hope it will help me keep me busy enough, not wanting you too much. Do you think it is possible? I wonder myself, but at least the time will go faster. I guess the warm weather is here to stay. I'm sitting here writing this letter and keep wishing you were here with me, giving me one of those soulful and very definitely meaningful looks. You know the kind I mean, don't you? Now, I got the title of the book from the letters that my father wrote. At the end of almost each letter, he used some variation of the phrase "a real whole lot," and so that's what it felt like was a good way to title the book. Um, Another thing that my father wrote is, sort of you can get an idea of his his love for my mother, how much he missed my mother, and his own kind of, I guess you would say, artistry. Both my parents wrote poems to each other. Unfortunately, there's only one poem that survived. And my mother actually had some poems that got published in newspapers in Baltimore, but I don't have any of those to be able to share with you. But anyway, one of the things my father wrote, he said, my dearest angel, Not every star in the sky multiplied a million times can tell you the total amount of love I have for you. Your guy says he's mad about you. Not only that, but he also loves you a real whole lot. He said, too, he'll always love you, I swear. So I think maybe I will stop there. And since we got a little late start, give you an opportunity to ask me questions. Um, I think what I will do, I'll just read this last slide in terms of letting you know that the you can purchase your personal copy of the book. If you go to the website, a real whole lot/bookstore, you can click on the link for your favorite online bookseller, and you can also participate in the Black History Month special. I'm offering autographed hard copies of the book at a special price. And for those of you who are local here in the Albany area, the Book House in Stuyvesant Plaza has copies of the book. And I will also share with you that you may borrow the book. The North Albany, Guilderland, and RCS, the Revena libraries, all have copies. So for those of you who are like me, my first question when somebody recommends a book to me is to check and see if the library has a copy, because I have enough books that I've already bought that I really don't want to add to my collection, whether it's paper copies or electronic copies. So I do routinely borrow books from the library. So I have to give a little plug to the library today and let you know that there are at least 3 copies that you can borrow through the Upper Hudson Library System. Okay. So what I will do is I will stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to share with you my contact information in due time too, if you'd like to get in touch with me otherwise. And for folks who we are fortunately just on one screen. So if you want to raise your hand, turn your camera on, or go to the participants list where you could go down to the bottom and under reactions, I'm sorry, you can raise your hand. So there are a couple of options. So does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, Roger, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I shall. Well, thank you very much for first of all, because I'm interested in I'm more interested in this than I realized, because my father also served in World War II, albeit later, like at the very end in the European theater. So I think there's a I must say that I found those letters quite steamy actually for that period.
Yes, they weren't graphic, but they were.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, when he came home, how was the adjustment when he's finally back and they're together
Hmm.
again? How did that play out?
It's kind of interesting because my sister and I, in particular, have had little conversations about that because, I guess it's all right now that they're deceased that I can say these things. But at any rate, they were both virgins when they got married. And according to my sister, my mother told my sister that they got books from the library about how to do it. So they, until my father shipped overseas, they hadn't really spent much time together. And so my sister maintains, and when you look at what his experience was in the army, he clearly came back a different person. And so there probably were some adjustments. I think one of the things that helped was at that time, my mother had moved to New York. One of the things that happened in the South prior to Brown versus Board of Education, there certainly were the universities and colleges were segregated. and Black students could only go to the segregated institutions, and there were no graduate programs. And some states provided scholarship money for students who wanted to go to graduate school to go someplace else. And so my mother chose to go to New York, and she was enrolled at NYU. In several of the letters, both of them talk about how they do not want to live in Baltimore. So it was convenient that my mother was in New York going to school. Now, some of us at the end, you get that, they're really kind of at wits' end now because they've been separated all this time and they're a little horny, I guess you would say. And so my father says at one point, I know you're not going to class when I come home. And so I sort of teased my parents because I, my father came home on November 27th, 1945. I was born August 27th, 1946. So I always say to them, oh, y'all got a little busy when I came, when you came home, because obviously they didn't waste any time before my mother was pregnant. Um, so there's that, just the fact that they had been separated all this time. They had each matured in a lot of different ways. The other thing was finding a job. Now, one of the things I didn't share about my father is that he participated in a contest with Pepsi Cola. And he was one of the first Negro salespeople that Pepsi Cola hired. So he was working with Pepsi Cola from July to when he got drafted and entered the service. So one of the things he did is he went back to Pepsi Cola for a short period of time because he was in the sales program. He was an intern and he didn't complete the internship, but they allowed him to complete the internship, but they did not hire him as a salesperson. So my father became a door-to-door salesman. He sold everything that you could sell door to door. And the last thing he sold was insurance with Columbia and United Mutual, which were both Black-owned insurance companies. And he did that up until, I don't know actually when he started selling insurance, but he stopped selling insurance in the mid 50s, shortly after my brother was born. And he did a variety of different jobs and then ended up becoming a school teacher and eventually assistant principal. So that was his trajectory in a way. So I don't know if I actually answered your question about adjustment, but there was their personal relationship, and then the economics of the time, and him needing to earn a living. My mother went back to teaching when I was, I think, like 4 years old. She worked for the New York City Board of Education, and her whole profession, her life. Once my family moved to New York City, they moved to New York City. So let's see. Angela had her hand up next.
Well, I have more of a comment than a question because,
Okay.
like Roger, I thought the letters were rather steamy. And I actually found them very touching. It brought a tear to my eye. I can't wait to read more.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
And that was all I had to say. It was
Okay.
really, really good. Thank
Okay,
you.
Rima,
Is it
I
okay for
see
me to?
you, but Donna had her hand up for next.
Okay. So Jackie, my question is, and let me turn this ringing phone off.
It's not there.
Hold
It's
on.
not here.
My question for you is, after reading your parents' letters, did it add any insight in terms of their relationship? Did it change what you thought about their relationship, or was it like consistent what you thought about their relationship?
Well, part of it is, seeing my parents as these young lovers. It's like, I only knew my parents as my parents. And my parents weren't particularly affectionate with each other. We knew that they had a physical relationship, but in terms of them, hugging each other and kissing and that kind of thing, it was sort of like, the way they talk in here is like, okay, a lot of displays of affection. So that there was that part of it, but then there was also the part of, in a way, I think them being separated formed this foundation for them, because they were married for 66 years when my father died. So there were lots of ups and downs in their relationship. And so I think that the letters, I guess for me, showed what their connection was, how deep their feelings were, what the foundation of their relationship was. So, yeah.
Okay.
So, Rima.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I've also had letters from my father and mother. My father was also in World War II, and excerpts of them are in the book called Voices of War, letters of people who were in the service. Um, um, I was 6 months old when my father was drafted, and 3
Mm.
when he came back. Um, uh, but my question is, um, how did you go about publishing it? Did you self-publish or did you get a publisher? Because my sister and I also thought, we have published letters in this book, this compilation book of lots of different people who wrote about the war. But how'd you go about publishing your book?
Well, basically, I self-published, but I self-published with an established self-publishing company. I
Mhm.
know some people who self-publish who, actually go and find a printer and print it and all of that kind of stuff. I have been involved in producing publications, not necessarily books, but newsletters, small pamphlets. I mean, I actually did, I guess I should say, officially published a book. I published a directory for several years of businesses that specialized in selling Black ethnic products by mail. So I had a little bit of knowledge. I knew about ISBN numbers. As a matter of fact, I had my own set of ISBN numbers. So I knew all of that, but I knew that I did not want to personally handle all of that stuff myself. And so that's why I use Ex Libris to publish. And one of the advantages, I think, of using a company like Ex Libris is that they can handle a lot of distribution for you. They handle the print on demand stuff because everything is now print on demand. They handle the hard copy, the paperback, and the ebook. So those are all things that I didn't have to handle. And I paid them to do it, but it was still something that I didn't have to handle. So it kind of depends on how much of the work you really want to do yourself. How you do it, whether you go to a printer, a local printer, or whether you use a company. And there are several. I use it Libris. Libris also has this other arm called, I think it's called Author House. And I know somebody who used both of them and actually felt Ex Libris did a better job. But then there are people who have problems with any of these companies in terms of kind of what your expectations are and what it is that they deliver. So I know there's someone here, Nicole Cherry, who has her hand up, and I'm going to call on her momentarily, who works with independent authors, and she has some experience in. I don't know if she wants to comment on that, but I'm going to call on her next, and we'll see.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Ken.
I was not going to comment on that, but first I wanted to thank you for this book. And we've worked together in the past. Yes, I do publicity for independent authors, but I really wanted to thank you for writing this book. And I think particularly because this is Black History Month, and some of the stories and articles are reading that we don't see enough images of Black love and Black couples in love. That's not the image that's often portrayed in the media and in a lot of our historical stories. So I know for me, when I read this book, it was just nice to, it's good to see Black love portrayed and these love letters, because I don't know that that image is one that we see much, particularly with Black men. Your dad was just as engaged and involved in these in this letter writing, and we don't often see Black men portrayed that way. So I thank you for the book. I also want to say what a, you know, both my parents are passed, and I'm like, I wonder, I think what a, how exciting that would be to see, because oftentimes, you know, as a child, your parents may not display a lot of affection. So I thought, what a privilege you had to get these letters and really sort of see your parents as people, because, you know, a lot of times we don't. And I have, my dad is passed, but I have some letters from him. He passed last year, so I still haven't been able to read. But I think after knowing you and reading your book, I've sort of have them in a special place for when that time comes, that I'm ready. But I wanted to say to you that I think the previous person kind of said it, that excuse me, reading those letters, I'm losing my voice, did they help you feel more connected to your parents? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you know, I mean, in a way, it's been kind of frustrating because we found you know, I became reacquainted with these letters after both of my parents were deceased. So there are lots of things that I would like to ask them about now, having read the letters, that I didn't get the opportunity to ask them when they were alive. Um, you know, as I said, my father did not talk about his experience in World War II. I know that my mother, in some respects, was more excited about his experience, at least demonstrated that, than he was, partly because, you know, they studied French in high school and college. And because my father was stationed in Marseille, he got to be very fluent in French. And so my mother was really excited that my father, you know, was fluent in French and that he got a chance to use this while he was in Marseille. Um, but there were just lots of, you know, little things like you know, getting to know that my father as a young man, because he was in his 20s, where he was commanding these troops, that he had these many people that he was supervising, how he managed that. One of the pictures in the book is on the back of it. My father writes that, you know, I think this was when he was in, I think it was when he was in France. So it was, you know, probably at the point maybe where he was captain. I don't have actual sequence of when he got his different promotions, but he was saying that, you know, here are the guys playing cards, who he was supervising, commanding. He said, who could be his father. So, you know, there are things about what my father did, the way my father handle things, that after reading these letters and finding out more about his experience in the army has given me you know, a much greater understanding of my father's being and his presence and how he handled himself. It was just um I guess in a way kind of amazing. One of the things my siblings and I kind of tease about is that we could particularly talk to my father about anything. And if you had a situation that you were trying to figure out what to do, my father would say, well, you could do this and you could do that and you could do the other thing, you can do that. And then, of course, after computers came out, we told my father, okay, that's enough. The computer doesn't need to generate out any more alternatives. We got enough. But that was because of, partly because of this experience he had in the army as a young man. So You know, there's just so many things in the history and, you know, the times that their lives spanned. It. You know, my father was 89 when he died. My mother was 98 when she died. So to go from the segregated South, because Baltimore is south of the Mason-Dixon line, to coming to New York City and doing the things that they did, both of them growing up in very poor families and attaining the things that they attained, and like, you know, all of their children are college educated, um, and that was an expectation. It was no doubt you could do whatever you wanted to do, but after you finish your college degree. So, and the library, I mean, every year for Christmas, we got a book. Now you might have got books in between wherever you went anywhere, particularly in New York City, because you're using public transportation, getting on the bus or the subway or whatever. The first thing my mother would say, "Do you have a book to read?" You didn't go anywhere without a book, And if you didn't have a book, she made sure you got a book. So, their appreciation of language. I mean, finding out that my father was an English major, it's like, okay, so I guess I won't go any more about that. But in a way, I get excited about talking about my parents, um, just because they led interesting lives and they had impact on a lot of people. Not the least of which are their families. So I see Nancy has her hand up, not out, up.
Hi, Jacqueline. It's really fascinating to listen to all of this. I'm curious about a couple of things. Um, I'm sorry I didn't quite catch this. How long they were separated and they were writing letters, and I've heard you say this story about the burning of the letters, and like today I heard it. I've always misunderstood the story and realized, oh my God, of course your father had 500 letters and he's like having to move wherever he's having to move. He can't keep carrying all these letters. So I got like that is like a heartbreaking breaking bit. And I didn't realize it was him writing. Like, of course it was painful to have to let go of all those letters. I just totally misunderstood the story, thinking it was your mother who was reacting. But I was wondering, what do you think? Do you have an idea of the total number of letters that were sent back and forth? Because
Oh my God.
right, the other question I have is, given the length of time, thinking, wow, they must have learned so much about each other in these letters, like because they didn't have this whole long time before he was, that. And I'm also wondering, did you see over his time the impact of the war on him? Like, so
That that's hard to say because I didn't say this. I forgot to say. My grandmother threw out most of the letters. That's why we only have 200.
oh my gosh.
Remember, I said they were in two big, large brown paper bags. They wrote each other every day. Sometimes my father wrote twice a day. So he went into the service in October of 41 and he came home in November of 45. So I would say, what would that be? Even if you just said 300 letters a year, what
Right,
would
right.
that be? 1,200 letters, and that it was
Yep.
going both ways. I will say that there were a couple of letters that were um, on paper letters that were sent that my father wrote before they went to V-mail, which is what they did somewhere around 43, where they started using V-mail. And one of those letters is like 4 pages. Um, so I think probably the letters that were written on paper will probably be much longer than the V-mail letters because they were limited to each V-mail letter being just one piece of paper. I don't know how prolific my mother actually was because, you know, as my father said, he got rid of 500 letters. So even if he brought all the other letters home, there are 500 we don't have. So
Dr. Kane, I
Thank
think
you.
John Skinner wanted to make a question, and I don't know if
Yeah,
John, did you?
I'm here. I can't raise my hand and have it seen.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you very much. It was an interesting talk. And I also have to comment that your father's career in the military was actually a really very successful, and he had a spectacular rise from the very bottom to into the upper ranks. So it's a very much a credit. The thing I was wondering about is if he was an English major and your mother went to college too. Do you have any idea what their favorite books were or favorite
Oh
authors?
God, their favorite books. Oh my God, I don't know. Now I know that my father would quote from there's a book called My Beloved, and actually at one point, because my parents quote my father in particular quoted it so much, my brother suggested that we have copies. So one Christmas, all three of us got copies of My Beloved. I actually have never read the book. I haven't, but
Hmm.
I never read it. Um, I don't know. My parents, I know early on, were fans of Langston Hughes, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Oh God, what's the guy who wrote the Simple series?
Which
Um,
series?
Simple. There's a character whose name is Simple, and it started out as a cartoon character, but then the person who developed the character started writing stories about him. So Simple is this character, and there's several books where Simple appears. It's sort of this barroom philosopher kind of person who, people underestimate that person's intelligence. Let me just go back to a minute for talking about my father and the Victorian poets. I was like, why does my father know these Victorian poems? This is not, you know, hmm, why?
Well, he's
This
an
is a
English
black
major.
man. My parents very much would be what you would call race people. It's like if you had a choice about who to do business with, you would do business with a black person. Okay, any choice, it was always black people. So it was like, Victorian, this doesn't fit with my image of my parents. But then I realized there was not a cadre of black writers, poets, etc., for my parents as young people in the 1920s to adopt. So I'm sure now my father would be quoting black poets, but they were not, at least not well known at that time. So part of the collection of books, oh my God, it's my parents' collection of books was unbelievable. And one of the difficulties we have had is what to do with all these books, because as a result of their love of books, each of us have our own collection of books that we have to deal with. So we could not take on my parents' collection of books. So my sister has a site on Facebook called Jack's Collectibles, because my mother was named Jacqueline too, and her family called her Jackie. One of the things that evolved in these letters is that because my father met my mother in school, she was called Jackie. And so when he first starts writing my mother, he calls her Jackie. But as the letters evolve, he starts calling her Jack, because that's how she signs all her letters, even though they knew each other with her name being Jackie. So you will see that as the letters go on, he does start addressing her as Jack. So that question about who their favorite. Oh, my mother loved James Baldwin. Oh my God, you say James Baldwin. One of the nice things about my parents being in New York City is that a lot of notables got buried at the cathedral. And so my parents, every time somebody famous black died and they were getting ready to be buried from the cathedral, St. John's Cathedral, my parents would go to the to their funeral. And a couple of times, because they would get there early, I saw them on television at the funeral. So, I guess that's just sort of, again, another little thing about, my parents, they were into it, you know. Don't mess around with my parents.
Yep.
Any other
Actually,
questions? So, oh,
I,
Nancy, did you
actually,
still have your hand up or that was just left over?
yeah. I was
Okay.
going to comment on the reading the Victorian poets. If you're looking at the poetry on the page, you actually don't have any idea at all of, except from you know, basic assumptions about what the author's like. All you see are the words in the poet, and so
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you have no idea that the other person is black, white, green, or whatever.
Right.
And in fact, you might not even know whether they're from Ireland, Scotland, England, or New England.
Yeah. My parents have a book that was published in, I think it was 1943, which is called The Negro Caravan, which I think is one of the first anthologies published of Black writers. So that was a book because it was always in the home for me. So that was a book that I did claim of my parents uh, when we were divvying up books. The other thing I just sort of mentioned, and I meant to actually download a picture of this to include in my, and I don't know whether you'll actually be able to see this. Oh, it does show up. It's called Infinite Hope. Let's see.
Let's bring it up a little higher.
A little higher.
Yes.
Keep
Okay.
going. Oh, that's
Oh,
beautiful.
yeah.
Now, I mentioned this book, number one, because it's a memoir, an autobiography by a artist named Ashley Bryan. And I'm kind of an Ashley Bryan fan because he was my Sunday school teacher. But he's a renowned artist, storyteller, and writer. And this particular book is written for young readers, and its subtitle is A Black Artist's Journey from World War II to Peace. Now, he served in the stevedores too, and he was part of the group when they stormed the beach. They sent the Black soldiers in to find the mines so that the white soldiers can then land on the beach. So anyway, he talks about his experience as a enlisted person in the military. And I think he really does a nice job of talking about the impact of segregation on him in particular, but in general, and how he coped with it. And one of the ways he coped with it was in his artistry, and that he sent many of his paintings, I mean, his drawings and letters to, I think it was a cousin who kept all of these things. And so now this book was published maybe about 2 years ago. But I think if somebody wanted to learn a little bit about the Black soldiers' um, experience, that he does a nice job of talking about very painful experiences. Now, I will say, I don't know how much my father wrote about pain, things like that, because a lot of the letters are missing. You also have the case with my father in particular, because he was overseas, and there is some reference in the letters to that about censorship and how much they could say about where they were, what they were doing. As a matter of fact, there's one letter where my mother says that she's trying to figure out what my father's doing, where he is, that kind of thing. And he's writing back and saying, well, I can't say but so much. And so my father just decided that he wouldn't I guess you would say, using any of his letter space for stuff that was going to get blacked out. He was going to write about something my mother could read rather about stuff that she couldn't read. So he doesn't talk much about his experience. I do have a couple of letters from my uncle, who's my mother's brother, and his experiences, with around race. And I had thought about including them in this, but it was just such a different tone. Because his experiences, it was bad for him. And you know, I just didn't want to include that because it was just a different experience. But I will read this one part, and it's really kind of subtle. He says, "This morning I had a false alarm. They came to my bed, awakened me, and asked me if I wanted to go home. I said, hell yes. Okay, report now to an outfit which is leaving tomorrow. Reported to the outfit. My only mistake, I forgot to whitewash myself. I am angry, mad, and some other things, but I'm still taking it on the chin. I'll be coming home, though one of these days I'll hit it on the right thing." So I say this is subtle because what he's saying is that only white troops could board that ship. He had to wait for a ship where they would allow Black soldiers to board to come home.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kane. I wanted to make a couple of notes of things that people said on the discussion, because some of you who aren't actually able to access this. The simple stories were written by Langston Hughes. The character is Jesse B. Simple. And that was a message from Donna. And there was Sherry mentions that she learned about Ashley Bryant at a library conference and gave the address ashleybryantcenter.org. And I'm echoing again. Oh, good. And I think we've come to the end of the hour. I hate that echo. Next 2 weeks from today, Laurie Stone, author of My Life as an Animal, stories, discusses and reads from her memoir, Everything is Personal, Notes on Now. And since someone asked, I had mentioned Alice Green. She had spoken 2 weeks ago about
Cast.
Thank you. And that was 2 weeks ago, but I believe that's going to be available online on the library site. Is that true, Will?
They get added to the Friends and Foundation YouTube channel.
Good deal. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and especially you, Dr. Kane. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.